Arie, it's really good of you to give up your time to come and have with this interview. I'm really looking forward to your address a bit later. And just wanted to capture something, a few questions from somebody who has spent a long working life in industry and more latterly kind of touring the world as a consultant and developing your ideas. Something that really struck me is you wrote a very influential book, The Living Company, and you tell some really powerful stories that explore the implications of thinking about organisations as living beings. And I wondered if in the 17 years or so since the book was published, that you had seen any changes in management practices that might sort of reflect that kind of paradigm shift more towards thinking of organisations as living beings.
Yeah, almost to my surprise, I think I have seen already a couple of years ago a real change in attitude, and that is not so much about the implications of organizations as living beings. It's part of it. The important thing behind that thesis is that in business and for business success, capital is in fact no longer the critical success factor. The critical success factor nowadays is definitely human talent and its level of education and the level in which that human talent has reached its potential. Because if you recruit somebody, you need 10 to 15 years to actually guide and test and move and direct. And in Shell, we would in principle recruit for a lifetime, which therefore if you take an undergraduate, you're talking about potential 30 to 35 years of career. And we use that 35 years to first establish what do we think is the potential of that person, and then to find out how can we direct that person through a career such that in his last 8 to 10 years he will be at his top potential and possibilities. And I think we're beginning to see more of that in business at large. And notably, what struck me was in the wake of the last recession, which started in 2008, in the year 2009, 2010, there were quite a number of indications in the press that sort of astonishment that where business in the old days would have said, well, let's cut cost and throw out 2,000 people, etc. That this time, in 2009, 2010, there was a growing number of companies that really did other things preferably and in preference to hitting the staff. They were really beginning to see their staff as their critical success factor. And of course you don't have to think very long to see the evidence of that. If you go into very successful modern companies like Amazon, like Microsoft, like Apple, you will see that these companies don't have all that much capital. Okay, they have an office building and they have maybe a warehouse and a number of staff has cars, etc. But if you look at their balance sheet, the amount of capital assets is quite limited, and certainly compared to the market value of those companies. And the difference between the market value, sometimes, for that sort of companies that we talk about, you're in the order of 200 billion easily in market value, and they sometimes only have 50 or 60 billion as assets. Now, that difference between the market value and the asset value on the balance sheet is in fact a capitalization of the human talent that makes up these companies. And so, yes, I think I've seen very clearly a beginning of an awareness of the human element as the critical success factor. And that really means that a company, instead of being a sort of machine where you have a few people to press the buttons to produce the profit, that you now beginning to have work communities that have to work together and must work together to find the solution for why the latest iPhone isn't working with the latest operating system, etc. And that's not a matter of machines, that's a matter of people and people at the right level. And so companies have become a lot more prudent with the way they treat their...
So in that context, and thinking about that finance has become, and capital has become less important and humans have become more important, do you think that's posed any new or different challenges to organisations in finding their true nature as communities, as humans?
Yeah. Because, Carol, that's what I'm going to talk about in my talk. Because, you see, the law still presupposes that capital is the critical and most important factor in business, and therefore has given absolute powers to somebody who's called a shareholder, who is not even a member of the work community. He's an outsider, but he happens to have little pieces of paper that represent £100 nominal value in that company. And they can tell who will run that company, what that person will be paid, and when he will be fired.
So
and so that there is a very direct contradiction, and the consequence of that is shortening of the lifetime of companies. That we've done, and I've had done 2.5 research projects to find out what is the average life expectancy at birth of a new company. You can find that out because there are the chambers of commerce. If you have a new company, you have to register it. If it's alive, it's still there. You have to report its profits, etc. And if it dies, it's taken off. And so that is the population register of companies. If you have that sort of information, entries, exits, and total population, you can calculate the average life expectancy of business. And I came from a company background. I'm second generation Shell. My father worked for Shell 26 years. I worked for Shell 38 years. I calculated in generations.
Yeah.
When we made the first study of the average life expectancy at birth of companies in Japan, Western Europe, and North America, have you any idea what we found?
Well, I know the first
Oh, you know the number. The number is 17 years, 17. In the second study, in many countries, that figure had come down below 10.
I hadn't heard
Amongst others in Holland. And one, almost certainly, one of the reasons is that tension between an outside power who's not a member of the living company, but has legal powers of an absolute nature, and that creates tensions that kills companies.
So, given we're in the business school, what implications do you think that has for the way we educate our young people who are going out to...
Well, I have no idea of your training program here, but let me tell you my own experience. So I went to a business school, Erasmus in Rotterdam, and but I was a poor student, and I had to work. So I got this job at the Shell refinery, and there, and I was allowed 1 day a week to go to school, to lectures, etc. And there I was being trained as an economist, etc. And I was told about the human elements in economics and business. And that was referred to, that was defined as something called Homo economicus. And Homo economicus was a statistical thing who seemed to know everything about what was happening around him, could predict the future, and acted in a totally rational manner. And then the next day I went to the refinery where we had 2,500 people working, and I never found any Homo economicus there. There were 2,500 of very complicated human elements and people. So I went back to my business school and I asked permission to have psychology added to my exam. So I had 2 or 3 years at an economic university in general psychology. And the professor was so happy with me that he gave me enormous literature lists. But Carol, I have never forgotten the lessons that I learned. And you, I don't know whether you've read my book or not, but you must find in my book several references that straight convey. So in a business school, I would certainly consider very seriously that you teach or demand from the students a certain knowledge about the human behavior, and because that without that you walk into a company in a sort of automatic manner. It's a sort of mechanistic thing. There's nothing mechanistic and certainly not in the companies we were just talking about, who've hardly any assets. Their real value is people. And there's nothing mechanistic in these people.
So what about the questions then that our graduates should be asking of organisations when they, given what you said about the lifespan and how important it is to treat people as humans and not as a Homo economicus.
Mm-hmm.
What might a graduate look for when they're applying or looking for a job in one of these organisations?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight and a lot of experience, etc., I think one of the most critical questions that a recruiting student should ask of the recruiter is, what are you going to do to get me up to my total, complete potential? Are you just going to put me in the accounts department and I will do the debtors for the rest of my life? Or are you going to try to find out what I can do for you in total, and how are you going to get me at that level? And that is basically, Carol, that is basically the same question that is being asked in military service. Because don't forget, in this country, but certainly in France, where I know a little bit about it, and in Brazil, that is the critical question for somebody who is a soldier recruit. That is, what is that army going to do in parallel to my career? And you will see well-organized armies, like well-organized companies, have a career development activity, and in parallel with that, a training program that will gradually move up and from relatively simple courses to quite complicated courses in the end. And if you have, and there are several companies that are very, very serious about this, they do that game all the way up to the last, usually 7 to 8 years in a person's career, because you shouldn't be longer in a position than 7 or 8 years anyway. And that's it, that is your top. And so they try to get you to that top in top condition. And that is the question in that area that your students should be asking of the recruiters. What the hell are you going to do about this? How are you going to get me at my top level?
And Arie, what should our students be asking of themselves then?
Sorry?
What should our students be asking of themselves in that context?
I don't know. I think the real driving force for a young person is curiosity. What can I do? That is you don't know the answer, but you're certainly optimistic about it. Most people are. And so you're going to find out. And that's, are you prepared? There are people who prefer certainty and calm in a little corner and go to football on Saturday. But most young people, and especially the sort of people that you have at your business school, are people with much greater curiosity about themselves.